All right, welcome back. I'm back with Graham Smitham, a man who wrote the book Quantum Buddhism, and for the last 40 years has been writing about, contemplating, talking about the connections between Buddhism and physics, especially quantum physics. And I'm going to turn it over to Graham just to give us a little intro about yourself.
I'm on?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, in the last talk, I was mentioning the fact that my background has been a little mixed in that the course of my life and my development as an author, as a researcher in Buddhism and quantum theory, has not always gone smoothly. And I mentioned, for instance, that I was living on the streets for some time, and that I had indulged to a great deal in drinking lots of alcohol for various reasons, such as the control of pain due to misdiagnosis of doctors, in fact. So I mentioned that the original misdiagnosis was at my first university, where I was doing mathematics and physics, and that during the summers I could barely go outside my room because my throat was absolutely on fire with pain. In fact, on one occasion I tried to go to the library and I sneezed and my nose just splattered with blood. This is severe hay fever. And yet when I went to doctors, so I was fighting on many fronts. Once I managed to control the symptoms with alcohol, because doctors refused to believe my misdiagnosis, and as I indicated, once one doctor misdiagnoses you, the other doctors fall in line with the misdiagnosis. And basically, you find yourself actually confronting a brick wall of insanity, when they will actually just not even listen to you. And I was amazed because it was only about 10, maybe 15 years ago, I think about 10, when finally an Indian doctor looked at my throat and he said, "But you've got severe hay fever." And that was just down the road, just in Brighton. That's after 30 years, 40 years of going to doctors, trying to sort this problem out. However, also during that time, once I got my condition under control with alcohol, I was able to pursue very, what should we say, very highly paid, entertaining jobs as a computer software developer, for companies like GlaxoSmithKline was one of them, London and Edinburgh. I can't remember them all, but very big companies. And in those days, you earned vast amounts of money. I mean, £1,000 a week. And this was 30 years, 20, 30 years ago. GlaxoSmithKline was an incredible place. It's like actually walking into a spaceship. I loved it. I was doing software which was modeled the molecular structure of chemicals, of drugs, and a transgenic mice database. And I was in charge of this shit. And I thought it was wonderful. But always during this time, I had this feeling that that there was something else I should be doing. And this is why I'm talking about it. I had this big house. I was living with a very nice woman who was my partner at the time. We'd go out for trips in the country, and I'd actually see images of the Buddha in the clouds looking at me, and I'd say, "You're not doing what you should be doing." And I think, "Go away." I like this. It's a lot of money. Look at my house. but I still had this compulsion to read about Buddhism. I'd actually be at conferences about programming, but I'd go into bookshelves and voices, and I told you about voices telling me to buy books. And like, I remember Jeffrey Hopkins, Meditation and Emptiness. Do you need that book, Graham? Chandra Curtis. Oh no, it was Shanti Deva's Santarakshita. Sorry, I meant that's the one. That's the one. Yes, indeed. And I'd read this stuff and be absolutely fascinated, but I still wanted to do the programming and have the money coming. Thanks very much. And then I'd read books by Western physicists doing philosophy, and I'd say, that's wrong. And a voice would say, yeah, but you've got to put this right, Graham. I said, go away. It's nothing to do with me. And so this was inner feeding, and this does sound very grandiose, but I'm telling you, it was there. It happened. And I wanted to shove it aside, even though I couldn't actually stop reading the books. I didn't like the idea because, research, writing about this stuff, when you do it properly, is astonishingly time consuming. My latest book, for instance, I started this last year, and a lot of the time I've been working every day, 7 hours, sometimes more. Work out how many hours it might be. I can't be bothered. I can't do mental arithmetic. But anyway, it's a lot of effort. Whereas, to me, writing a book, like, I don't know, someone like Deepak Chopra would take, a week or so. It's not on a serious level of research. This is what really irritates me about the way that the whole kind of quantum Buddhist or quantum spiritual, what should we call it, movement has gone. It's gone a route where it is so vague, imprecise, making very dubious claims without the proper research. Anyway, I did point out that eventually my nice house, my nice girlfriend, all the money rolling in for these super contracts fell to pieces, partly because of going through a particularly bad summer, getting crazy, relationships split up, ending on the streets. And I do want to point out that I did mention being stabbed in the neck. It wasn't the case that I joined a gang of, marauding street fighters or anything like that. I seem to remember it was just a heroin addict took my coat and I tried to get it back from him and he stabbed me in the neck. I was quite a peaceable drunk, to be quite honest. It was not me involved in fighting. I was attacked. But I did sleep in parks. I did sleep on the streets because I had nowhere to go. Drinking a lot, because if you have very bad hay fever, such that your throat is aching and on fire all the time, being on the streets is not a good idea because you have no chance of it stopping. So you go to a pub as soon as you can. And it's useful to have drinking buddies because when you run out of money, they'll fund you. And when you get money, you can fund it. That's the way it works. And it was then only after going through treatment center, going back to meditation, having dramatic visions of being surrounded, which I talked about, by Manjushris, and then going to the Bodhisattva centers, that I returned to doing the research I'd originally been doing at Sussex University into Buddhism and science. So that's the background to try and clarify a bit. The point I want to make there is always this feeling that something to do with research and Buddhism was was where I was destined to end up. And during that time, I didn't want to do it. You know, I wanted to have a nice life involving lots of wine, women, nice houses, lots of money rolling in. I was a very shallow person in some respects. Sometimes it needs for you to have a crisis for you to wake up to certain aspects of life. And life is not always fluffy. I mean, this is another aspect of, you know, the current quantum spiritual brigade. You read their books, you think, you know, life is, you know, it is basically a teddy bear's picnic once you read the right book. It's not necessarily like that. You just got to look at what's really happening in the world instead of living in a fantasy. And here again, I won't go into too much detail to the later point. The way Buddhism is being presented is fake. If you look at the Lam Rim properly, if you look, and the Lam Rim, we ought to say what these things are. The Lam Rim is the path to enlightenment. It's a set of meditations on aspects of life and the Dharma, life and Buddhist practice, which are practiced in order to produce a deep awareness of the realities of samsara, which is the suffering cycle of birth and death. It's not the fluffy teddy bear's picnic of life. It's the suffering cycle of birth and death. And you can see this. It doesn't mean you can't see a lot of people having very nice lives, very beautiful things happening. Earlier on, I was watching a YouTube video of a little girl teaching a puppy how to go down a slide. It was wonderful. Life has lots of wonderful things happening in it, but overall, it is a cycle of suffering. And people will say, well, you know, well, it's not true that Buddhism says Buddhism is so negative. And it can't be right, because it says all life is suffering. And it's lots of joyful moments and lots of beautiful moments. So, you know, Buddhism must be false. It says all life is suffering. And again, this is because Buddhism has been mispresented. This is a very subtle example of a misrepresentation of Buddhism. Buddhism does not say all life is suffering. Buddhism says all conditioned phenomena are of the nature of suffering, which is a very, very different thing.
So go into that.
It is saying that conditioned phenomena are all phenomena which are dependent on other phenomena. This is the realm of cause and effect, realm of karma, of interdependent origination, which is emptiness, the fact that all things rely on other things. So this is the conditioned realm of cause and effect. And the observation is not all things are suffering, it's that are of the nature of suffering. So why are joyful things of the nature of suffering? Because they end. Simple as that. Also, quite simple, if I'm eating an ice cream on a hot day, hot summer's day, and it's fantastic. You know, I feel absolutely blissful. If I eat 100 ice creams, I will be sick. So it's not the case the ice cream is of the nature of blissfulness in itself. It is the condition of the hot summer's day, the ice cream and my hunger, which produces that blissfulness, not the ice cream. This is very important, actually. It's not the ice cream. It's the ice cream plus the hot day plus my need to eat the ice cream. All these things come together to produce the pleasure, not the ice cream in itself. And all pleasant experiences will turn into their opposite if they are repeated to excess. But also the case is that basically the nature of samsara is that we all die, and whatever joyful, beautiful experiences we have, most people also have vast amounts of pain in their life. Not all, but if one actually looks at the realities, as I said, nowhere does Buddhism say that life is, if you read the right books, life can be blissful every moment. Well, no, unless you're enlightened, that is. Why is this? And this is relevant to Bone. Very soon we'll get to Bone. And the Buddha quite clearly said there is an unconditioned realm. So the ultimate bliss, all conditioned phenomena of the nature of suffering, because even if they're good, at some point in time, they will become bad. It's the nature of samsara. However, the mind can move to the plane beyond the conditioned realm. So this is, again, people don't understand that Buddhism is not saying all life is suffering. It does say all conditioned phenomena of the nature of suffering, but the unconditioned is pure bliss. Enlightenment is attaining the unconditioned state of being in the world at the same time as having moved one's mind into the unconditioned. Now, again, I would say that, as I said last time, a person wrote to me saying he considered me to be enlightened because nobody else could write this stuff, but it's not true. You just got to be very clever. Fortunately, I was born with an intellect enabling me to do this stuff. You don't need to be enlightened. Probably also part of my mind there is the possibility that I'm in line with a mind continuum of somebody who knew this stuff in the past. I've got reason to believe that. However, to attain the unconditioned, according to a lot of Buddhist books that I was reading this recently, you know this one, don't you? I mean,
sure.
It talks about, the idea that you're going to read a book by Deepak Chopra and become enlightened is a bit. When you read this, it talks about 400 incalculable eons, or I can't remember what it is. Incalculable eons? You can remember stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's 3 incalculable eons. Like the first
3.
one
Okay.
is the path of accumulation and preparation. Yeah. Maybe one of, something like that. Yeah, exactly.
It's a long time. I mean, in the some of the Lamrim texts, there's that beautiful example of, is it Dharmakirti in the cave? No, Atisha, who goes in with the, is it,
Are you talking about like the Vajrabhairava, like the horns?
No, I didn't know that. A tissue comes out and sees he's trying to meditate. He meditates in a cave for a few years, and he doesn't. He's trying to get a vision of one
Oh,
of the
you're
days.
talking about Asanga trying to have a vision
Asanga,
of Maitreya.
that's the one, Asanga. Yes, and he comes out, and he comes out. He sees somebody.
He finally has to suck the maggots off of a dying
Yeah,
dog.
that's right. Yes, but he sees somebody stroking a stone with a feather. And he says, "What are you doing?" He says, "Well, I'm trying to carve out something from this stone with this feather." And he says, "My God, you know what? That's a lot of patience if he can be that patient." But the point is, you know, the idea that it's so easy to attain enlightenment is just absurd.
Well, let's use this chance to switch though to, I guess, the quantum. You're going to make the connection, but the other empty view, in the sense that one way to look at it is it takes that long to remove. You use the word to move to your mind to a different state, but ultimately you're removing our false projections onto reality, right? But there's another approach which says that that the unconditioned state is accessible. It's present right now, and not only is it present, but all of the good qualities, everything we think of in life that's good and then some, is already built into this. Or is it? What's your take on that? Like, because this is obviously a big debate going back in India and Tibet, is whether these qualities exist or don't exist.
Okay, well, you're referring to the debate between Rantong and Shentong.
Right, other empty and self-empty. In
well,
other words,
Rantong is self-empty.
Well, I'm not even saying a debate. I'm just saying, forget about the debate between them. I'm just saying that do you want to talk about the other empty and how it connects to bone?
No, because we must start with Rantong first.
Well, okay, so and that's what we were talking about.
Then we'll move to Shentong. Rantong is empty of its own nature.
Okay.
Shentong is empty of the adventitious stain, so it's other emptiness. So you've got self-emptiness and other emptiness. Self-emptiness is the view of emptiness which is usually thought about in the West, and other emptiness has only just begun to be appreciated. And this really is because the Gelugpas, who are purveyors of the self-emptiness, the Rantong view, were the first really. They were ascendant philosophically in Tibet, and also self-emptiness was the first turning. No, the second turning.
Sorry. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but basically, what you were describing before about everything being dependent and hence not existing, that's what they mean by self-empty. So you kind of described that.
Yeah. But in terms of physics, though, let's go back to, let's say, at the end of the 19th century, it was believed by a lot of people, a lot of physicists even, that all material phenomena were actually, all material objects, entities, were internally solid. Even though John Dalton had come up with his theory of atoms and atomic weights and so forth to explain how chemical combinations functioned, which worked beautifully, physicists believed that this was only a mathematical fiction. So you had someone like Max Planck, and Max Planck was the inadvertent discoverer. And I say inadvertent, he didn't believe he discovered quantum theory. It was Einstein who realized what he discovered. But Max Planck, at the beginning of his scientific career, thought that the material world was internally solid. There was no atomic structure, even though atomic ideas were used in physics at the time. But they believed that these were just mathematical fictions. There's a very good example of this. For example, Maxwell produced the electromagnetic equations. I think it was Maxwell or the person before Maxwell, name I forget. But when they were thinking about how magnetic what we call them, magnetic fields functioned, he thought about having lots of compasses, as it were, around and watching the pointers on each compass and how they would point. And then he realized that, in fact, the compass needles would make an arc. And he suddenly thought, well, you know, if you take the compasses away, there must still be a force field there. So, if you like, those compass needles are they're just kind of aids to seeing what's going on. So, a lot of physicists thought that the idea of atoms were just aids to visualization, but of mathematics. But in fact, internally, there was no internal structure whatsoever, which is an extraordinary thought. And this is, you know, at the beginning of the 20th century. This changed around, I don't know, 1920, or maybe earlier than that, maybe 1910. End of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, a lot of physicists, even Max Planck, thought the world was continuously solid inside. Now, the Buddhists knew it wasn't. The Buddhists figured this out. This is, you know, people will start shouting at you. You could say, oh, no, the Buddhists didn't know anything about physics. Where's their equations? They weren't concerned with equations, but they knew the metaphysics. And Vasubandhu, and this always impresses me, Vasubandhu explains, and he simply says, well, if there were no internal structure to, say, a rock, it couldn't wear away. If material objects really were internally completely solid with no internal structure, there could be absolutely no weak points. As soon as you say, well, there's a weak point here, you've got internal structure. You've got to say, well, why is there a weak point there? So you've got to start talking about, well, you know, what is inside a material object? It's either completely solid or it's not completely solid. So he said, but the only way things could wear away is if, you know, bit by bit, say water's moving down a mountain, the only way it could actually produce a gouge in the mountain is if little bits were breaking off, which means there must be lots of weak points. So there must be internal structure. So it can't be the case that material objects, and of course the Buddhists believed that internal to any material object, there were atomic moments of existence. And those moments of existence were dependent on all other moments of existence, and this is what we call emptiness, the interdependent nature, the insubstantial nature, the ultimate insubstantial nature of reality. Now, Planck started out believing everything was internally solid. And at the end of his life, 80 years later, I believe, so around 1980, I think it was, 1970, he gave a lecture in which he says he believed that mind is the matrix of all phenomena. Mind is the matrix of all matter. Mind is the matrix of all matter. And he basically said mind created the material world. But the first move is to understand that the material world itself is empty of substantiality. Now, how empty is it? Do you know how much solid space is in roughly an atom? Do you know?
I know it's less than 0.0001% matter.
Yeah, correct. It's actually the amount of empty space. It's 99.999999913. It's almost totally empty space. There is nothing there. Almost, absolutely nothing really. There's just a wisp of possible existence, and the amount of matter is negligible. You know, I mean, so you're right. It's 0.000000001% solid stuff. And you know, when you pick something up, for instance, and you think, oh well, my hand is in contact with this solid stuff. No, it's not. What's happening here is the electronic forces between your hand and the book. It's the forces. All this stuff is more like a hologram. Indeed, Bohm talks about holograms. He talks about the hollow movement, which we'll come to very shortly. So this is the first sort of emptiness. All conditioned phenomena lack substantiality. They do not have their own internal substantiality. And we can talk about two aspects. One of them is that each phenomena depends on all other phenomena. And also there is just a direct lack of substantiality in phenomena anyway. There's nothing there. Well, virtually nothing there. I mean, the amount of stuff there is negligible, but it just glimmer, you know.
In other words, it's basically just fluctuations in electromagnetic forces which seem to appear as solid objects, and we seem to interact with them based on our five senses. But they don't last for a moment. They don't exist separate. It's really just one kind of, I wouldn't say one continuum, but continuums of matter and energy.
They are actually flickers of momentary pulses of seeming existence in a quantum field. What is a quantum field? We'll come to that a bit later. This is empty. This is emptiness of. This is the Rantong. This is emptiness of self-nature. What we think is out there as maybe atoms, laptops, whatever, floors, guitars, books. They are only appearances. They lack substantiality, but they look very substantial. They interact with you. You interact with them. The whole thing looks like an incredibly substantial world, but it's not. And this is the first phase, and this was the main understanding of Tibetan Buddhism, which came to the West, and was the only understanding, philosophical, metaphysical understanding, really, which came to the West for a very long time. However, the debate is, well, I mean, you know, what is there? Okay, and even debates within Tibetan Buddhism are, well, Nagarjuna was a famous Madhyamaka Rantong exponent, although he actually wrote non-Rantong stuff, but very few people looked at that in the early years. He would say, well, things, and I spoke about this earlier, things don't exist but they don't not exist either. So, nor both nor neither, but that's a bit. And from a Madhyamaka, Prasangika point of view, they just left it there. And for some people, this seems a bit, I mean, from some people, this seems a bit, what's the word?
Like incomplete or vague?
Incomplete, well, yeah, vague, paradoxical, incomplete, vague, yeah. What did it really mean? It exists and it doesn't exist. Now, there's another avenue of Tibetan Buddhism, which is Yogacara and also Jonang. The Shentong, although Yogacara is kind of between the two. So we'll talk about Shentong is other emptiness. So okay, if this stuff is empty, doesn't mean really at the end of the day there's not much there at all. There's nothing. Life is just pretty meaningless. It's just an illusion of pretty much nothingness. And this is this is kind of feeling that some people get when they're presented with the Madhyamaka idea. Neither existent nor non-existent. Well, what is there? Now, from the other emptiness point of view, from the Shentong, they would say, well, this is nihilism. This is really not presenting reality in a very favorable light, is it? To be quite honest. And I'm obviously putting this very crudely. When accomplished meditators meditate, they don't experience emptiness, they experience the luminous mind. They don't come out of meditation and say, well, that was a waste. They don't come out of meditation and say, well, that was a waste of time. There was nothing there. What do they experience? They experience bliss, luminosity, and emptiness. What does that mean? They don't experience anything substantially material there, but they do experience blissful luminosity and pure consciousness. We could call this pure consciousness. In Hinduism, this is called, Satchitananda, being, consciousness, bliss. So from the Jonang point of view, the Shentong point of view, the world is actually, although the material world is what we seem to live in, from their point of view, the material world is just an illusion floating in a sea of blissful, luminous awareness. And if we take or employ methods of meditation to move our mind from the level of material involvement, it is possible to directly experience the blissful, luminous awareness, which is empty of the other distracting material aspect of illusions of the material world. In other words, the ultimate nature of reality is empty of other. It's empty of all the inconsequential conditioned phenomena of everyday life. And this realm is timeless, or experientially timeless, and isn't going anywhere. It neither comes nor goes, does not change from one thing into another. It just resides at the base of reality as timeless awareness. Well, you know about this stuff. Would you like to add anything?
Well, why don't you tie it in with the physics now?
Okay,
I
so
mean, well, I was gonna say, yeah. So, wow. Okay, I guess I'll just add that awareness, that timeless, luminous awareness. Um, it's experienced. It's not experienced as though you have to, go somewhere else. Once this is recognized in oneself, it, you know, it, well, I'll let you go on, but I just want to say that I would just say it's experienced simultaneously
oh
with.
yes, once you've activated this luminous awareness, and that there are levels of being able to do this. For instance, if you go to levels of jhana, where you can activate. I mean, there are levels of luminosity, but I mean, if you activate it in your life to any degree, it's there all the time.
Mhm. And could I just add, and let me know if you agree with me, because you compared it to the Satchitananda. I
Mm.
think the difference, though, is the Satchitananda concept is that is some kind of dualistic separate from the conventional, whereas the Buddha's innovation to that was that it's not separate. I think it's a minute detail.
There is a debate about this in Advaita Vedanta, which I'm
Hmm.
not. But I
Yeah,
mean,
let's not go there.
yeah,
Let's not go there.
we won't go there. I mean, yeah,
But I know
the
what you
analogy,
mean. I,
yeah,
I, I
the
think I
analogy
think
is not perfect. I agree.
I
Yes,
think
I agree.
Asanga describes is as like the four paramitas of of the ultimate truth, and I think it's pure, blissful, luminous, and one other. There's four of them, but yeah, permanent or self. I think it's called
That's
self
right. It's permanent, and of
or
course,
self.
this is where the Madhyamikas, Prasangikas
Right.
really
Well,
don't
sometimes,
like
yeah,
it. Yeah,
exactly, and
which,
and it's
which
not permanent in the sense that it doesn't change. The continuum itself is permanent, and that's a good segue into maybe Bohm and the hollow movement, because I think that's what it more. The hollow movement is more of a continuum that never solidifies for more than a moment, but it continues
yeah,
inevitably.
yeah.
It doesn't
Okay,
have a beginning. It doesn't have an end.
when we come to Bohm, it's worthwhile emphasizing again the two phases of Bohm. Often when Bohm is presented, he's either presented in his first materialist
Mhm.
phase or in his later spiritual phase. The people who present Bohm in his materialist phase present Bohm as trying to rescue a material world back from the clutches of quantum mysticism. As I mentioned, Einstein went to Bohm, and again, I'm parodying. I'm trying to make this accessible by being a bit lax with my terminology. Einstein went to Bohm and said he was tired of Bohr's Eastern mysticism. It's got to end. Quantum theory cannot be tainted with Eastern mysticism. Get me my material world back. And Bohm at the time was a Marxist, so he had no problems trying to get a material world back, because this is what Marx would have wanted as well. And I will mention this because I do want to mention this. This is when I realized that Marxists were often violent thugs. I was once in a debate very early on when I was doing maths and physics with a Marxist, trying to explain to him the world didn't exist at all in the way that Marx would have liked it to. And I thought he was going to hit me. We were in a pub and he was going, no, I'm just telling you, I'm a physicist. I'm just telling you, this is quantum theory. And he was very upset with me for telling him they don't actually want to face reality. And this is
Well,
my
you could look at it from the perspective of the Buddhist perspective that the self, like the self is always dependent on the other. So the more someone grasps at the material world is a direct reflection of how much they're grasping onto their internal sense of self. So you're
Oh,
almost
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
they
Yes,
interpret
of
it as
course.
being murdered. They interpret it internally,
That's a very good
emotionally,
point. Yes, that's a very
as,
good point.
as being
Yes,
murdered when you
that's a
just tell
very
them
good
about.
point.
And I know what you mean. It's
Yeah. But
super.
even then, see that this is interesting because if this was a Marxist, he was very, very upset. But even a lot of the physicists were very upset. Like John Bell said, "Look, we want to live in a real world." He says, "No sensible person believes the world is not there."
And just think of how unscientific
Oh yeah,
and
oh yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
it's just so funny, like, because I think you'll get into this more. Our own experience proves that things exist, that something exists. It's not that when you figure out the formula, things stop existing.
Mm,
It's quite the opposite. It
yeah.
actually means, but
Yeah, not many people know there's quite a lot of good jokes in quantum theory. Einstein once said, "I don't believe my bed disappears when I leave my room, and when I come back, it jumps back into the corner." There's lots of
mhm.
John Bell, John Wheeler actually believed that the world hovered in a state of quantum potentiality until sentient beings came into existence. And then the sentient beings brought the universe into existence backwards in time. Sounds weird. We can go into it much
No,
later.
that's kind of almost like a Hindu interpretation,
Right.
or
And John Bell said, well, he said, so are you telling me that the universe was hanging around in a state of non-existence, waiting for human beings to arrive? I mean, or did it have to wait for, a human being with a PhD?
right?
Lots of John Bell had lots of withering stuff he directed at the idea that quantum theory involved a world hovering in semi-existence and the mind produced a full reality, which is what Bohr seemed to seemed to imply. In the double slit experiment, it seemed that if I looked where a particle was going, I could see it as a particle. And if I didn't, it became a wavy mess of quantum goo, let's put it that way. And this horrified so many of the early physicists. Heisenberg, said, I can't believe, the world can't be this insane.
And I just want to add, what they all missed, that Dharmakirti Dignaga figured out, is they're assuming, because they're based on Plato and Descartes before, or Descartes and then before Plato, Aristotle, this assumption of an external vessel and an internal self, whereas the Dharmakirti followers said that there is no real, it's not really that we can't prove there's an external world or an internal world. All we know is that we have a succession of moments of experience. So it's not that it's not that the bed disappeared and doesn't come back. It's just that it's irrelevant. Only thing that's relevant is where his mind is at the present.
Yeah, I mean, but even, that, what you just said, that assumption of an independent observer is at the base of physics. Because it's actually, in one of John, I can't put my hands on it immediately, but I know there's a quote where Bell says, the world must be this way if we make the scientific assumption of independent observers. So the assumption of independent observers is actually right in the ground of the metaphysics of physics. So this is why the idea that it's all dissolving into quantum weirdness is so threatening, which is why Einstein went to to Bohm and said, we've got to stop all this Eastern mysticism, making a mockery of our scientific endeavors. And Bohm, being the brilliant mathematician he did, massaged the quantum equations, so he produced equations which you could read as being particles, electrons, for example, having positions and moving in definite paths at all times, whether we were looking or not, whether anyone was looking or not looking. They were always there,
Right.
always there. So John Bell actually said, when I read Bohm's work, and in fact Bohm was actually rediscovering something Louis de Broglie, an earlier physicist, had put forward, but no one noticed de Broglie at the time. So it's become called the de Broglie-Bohm theory. John Bell said, I saw the impossible done. Why are we teaching this? The only reason people think that Bohr's such a god is because he got there first and he brainwashed everybody. But this is the truth. Things are there, they're always there.
Okay, that's the early Bohm.
The early Bohm. But in fact, you see, it's misrepresented because things aren't always there. Because if you look at something like the spin of a particle, the spin of a particle becomes contextual, which means that what the spin of a particle is depends how you measure it. Now, very rarely do people tell you this when they're actually talking about Bohm's early theory. They present it as if Bohm has sorted it all out. Here's this theory, everything's there, the kitchen sink hasn't disappeared into quantum weirdness, it's always there. Kettles, TVs, guitars, they all stay there. Don't worry, we've solved it all for you. It's not true, because when it comes to a lot of other issues, spin is one of them. In fact, it's only position of particles and trajectories which are real. So, and one professor on YouTube explains contextuality means, suppose I'm looking at a car and I want to know what the car is. If I measure it at the same time as measuring its color, it may turn out to be a Volvo. But if I measure it at the same time as measuring it to find out what its age is, it might turn into a Peugeot. So things are not there. It's only a very small bit of the world which is there all the time. All of the rest of it is just as weird. Bohm's just managed to kind of tuck it away so that people just look at this bit. Oh, this bit, oh, I like this bit, it's really real. Now, Heisenberg said something, Heisenberg looked at this and he says, it's nonsense. And Heisenberg said, this is an ideological superstructure in search of a real world. Sorry, he just called it an ideological fantasy, or something like this. I can't remember the exact word. But he just said, this is an ideological scam. Even Einstein said this is too cheap. They saw through it. They saw that, in fact, that there were a lot of rough edges. It didn't bring back the real world. It just put the weirdness in other places, and Bohm realized this. One of the important things is that the way that thing functioned in this ontological pilot wave, this theory is called a pilot wave theory because it has real waves pushing real particles, electrons, protons, whatever, around the world. The particles there all the time. The pilot wave is pushing them around. Pilot wave is real, particles are real. No quantum weirdness, or there's lots of quantum weirdness, but we won't think about it. We just want to play with the real world. But the bits we've got that are real. But the problem with this is it means that because the way the pilot wave works is that when something changes at one part of the universe, things happen at the other side of the universe instantaneously in response to what's happening over here. And this is why you get a completely interconnected universe. There's not one bit of the universe which is disconnected from any other, apparently. It just seems that everything instantaneously moves when anything moves elsewhere in the universe. And this is where the idea of the completely interconnected universe comes from. Bohm's later The Undivided Universe was the book which, I'll just go and get it and see. You see that?
Mm-hmm.
The Undivided Universe. David Bohm, Basil Heide. Basil Heide, my physicist friend, is acquainted with Basil Heide. So he knows about this stuff. So this is this was his last book. We wrote it with Basil Heide. I think Heide finished it after Bohm had just died. And it's called The Undivided Universe because in Bohm's early work, because the way the pilot wave functioned, particles would instantaneously respond to other things happening anywhere else in the universe, it appeared. So, but because there were so many problems, Bohm realized that he needed to develop further. And as I mentioned earlier, he fell out of love with Marxism, later got into more mystical directions. He does talk about this. What he realized was that there are many, the contextual aspects, for instance, had to be taken seriously. What did the contextual aspects mean? The contextual aspects means that a measurement does not measure something which is determined ahead of the measurement. So you're directly back with Bohr, because this is exactly what Bohr said, that the measurement and the measured cannot be separated ultimately, which is another aspect of the undivided universe, because measurement and measured is interconnected. It depends on the way this is occurring. So in fact, his early attempts did not banish quantum mysticism, it just actually magnified it into a glorious idea that in fact particles are not separate aspects of reality. They are insubstantial flickers of momentary apparent existence appearing from a deeper level of potentiality, which Bohm called the hollow movement. Now, the reason he called it hollow movement was because he saw this in terms of being like a hologram. In a hologram, you have a pattern which is etched into a surface which bears no relation to the final image at all. But when light is shone onto the surface, and then that light is reflected and interacts with another beam, so you need a split beam actually. So you've got one beam reflected, you create an image. And that image is created from the information on the hologram. But on the hologram, the image is not there. The information to produce the image is there, but it doesn't look anything like the image. And in fact, you can see this because if you cut the hologram in half, you can still get the image. Cut it in quarter, you still get the image. Do you know about this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you can keep cutting a hologram, you'd still get the full image, but it will get fuzzier. But the image is encoded at every point on the hologram. So here you really do have the undivided universe, because every image in a hologram is contained at every point of the hologram. So Bohm reasoned that the implicate order contained the information for everything that could possibly happen, but that every part of the whole movement had the information in a way, in a similar way to a hologram. So the implicate world was completely different to the explicate world in that the information for the explicate world existed at every point in the implicate order. But as the hollow movement moved, as it were, the explicate order unfolded from the implicate order. So our experience of the everyday world unfolds from a deeper level of potentiality.
Now, does that happen in the present moment on a moment-to-moment basis? What we experience as the present moment is the unfolding from the implicate order into the explicate order, moment by moment.
Yep.
And what was I going to say? You're saying it contains everything, the implicate order, but I guess how I'm envisioning it is each moment, everything manifests, so to speak, but the shape of how it manifests changes moment by moment. Even though it never increases or decreases, the way it expresses itself is constantly changing. And I guess you could say it's never the same pattern in any two moments.
The way that Bohm highly explained it was that what unfolds at any moment depends on what went before. So although you have all these potentialities, there must be the potentiality for anything that could possibly happen. And in fact, if you look at Stephen Hawking's idea which he put forward in the grand design with Leonard Mlodinow, which is very similar to John Wheeler. The idea the universe starts out with potentiality for everything that could possibly happen to be potential. But what actually comes into existence depends on various activities of the beings within. I mean, the problem with Stephen Hawking is he's trying to stay a materialist at the same time as being an utter, sort of consciousness creates reality from quantum potential. You read it, see, this is fraudulent almost. Because he actually quite clearly states, this is an anthropic point of view. But then, he would say things like, well, whenever I hear of Schrödinger's cats, I want to reach for my gun. Well, he presents himself as a materialist at the same time.
Well, you're familiar, I'm sure, with Vasubandhu's the Abhidharma teaching. There's one interesting thing that caught my attention, even though it's kind of a dualistic idea that there's a stream of matter and a stream of mind that continuously, move moment by moment. But there's like of the 5 or 6 causes. One of the causes I think is called like the direct cause, or the
yes.
And the way it's described is it's 2 parts. It's like everything that allows the seed to become a sprout, but it's also everything that doesn't stop the seed from becoming a sprout. So
that's right.
Almost has like a holographic idea that everything arises where it's meant to be, because everything else is not stopping it from happening in that place.
That's brilliant.
Thank you. I've been wanting to share that.
I had not thought of that. I mean, I knew it from way back. Yes, the cooperative cause, of course.
And when I thought about, and when you think about the Alaya consciousness,
yes,
unfolding,
of course.
I'm going to send you something.
Brilliant. Yes, you've got the primary cause and the cooperative causes. Yes. What are the others?
And I think it's even has a different name though. I think it's like a special cause that just simply like there are cooperative causes as well, but this particular one, it's very strange that it says like I said, everything that doesn't stop something from happening is considered. I think the word is, oh man, it's something. It's not dominant condition, but it's something like that. Dominant condition is something.
There is a dominant condition. Yes.
The dominant condition is what makes like the eye consciousness image appear from the eye sense organ.
Yes, that's right.
But I want to look this one up.
Yeah, all of this stuff makes complete sense when you put it in, in the context of Bohm's Holo movement. Exactly. Nobody, I'm telling you, nobody has done this research. Nobody, my book.
Let's talk about your book. Yeah, let's talk about your book a little bit.
Okay. But I did not go into this one, but I won't add anything in. This is finished. That's be another one. You like
Vasubandhu?
It is extreme. But Buddhist philosophy is extraordinary in its depth, in its width.
Oh yeah. And that's why I don't like it when they call the Abhidharma or the Sautantrika schools lower schools, because it's just different. It's different ways of looking at things. And, and I'll talk about this another time, but I look at it as like the Abhidharma school is Buddhist phenomenology. The Sautantrika school is epistemology. So they have different functions.
Yes.
And traditionally you would study all of them. It wasn't like, okay, this is the highest. That's the Western approach. Give me the highest one. Okay, I could skip all the rest. But the very basis of prasangika, of consequence, is you have to know the lower position in order to transcend it.
Yes, yes, indeed.
But I didn't mean to throw you off. Do you want to talk about your book?
No, okay. The holograms. You've got this. The implicate order is like a vast hologram of possible events to occur. But another important point is that whereas in the early phase, Bohm really didn't address the issue of consciousness, in his later phase he talks about consciousness and the appearance of matter. Now, Bohm doesn't use the term appearance, but if you read him carefully, matter as solid stuff cannot be existing in the implicate order because it is potentiality. It is holographic potentiality. And matter doesn't exist anywhere. Cartesian matter never existed. It doesn't exist. Only momentary flashes of apparent existence seen by multitude of sentient beings, as it were, sharing a collective environment, are all moving through this hollow movement, this hologram, as it were, and sharing common experiences. And as they ascend or have the experience, the energy of having the experience, if you like, or the energy of their free will decisions on top of that, leave patterns in the hologram, in the hollow movement, in the implicate order, which then conditions what comes next. And this is happening moment by moment. They quite clearly state this is moment by moment. There are waves of potentiality coming together to produce flashes of existence. Now, the reason why, one of the reasons given by Bowman Hiley for putting forward theories like this, and what Hiley is doing is honing the mathematics of this stuff. And maybe we get my physicist friend to actually join us to talk about this because he knows Hiley. That would be excellent. I'll mention this to him on Sunday. Is in quantum field theory, you've got the quantum field of potentiality. And of course, within physics, they can't see consciousness. So they assume consciousness isn't there. They just think there is the quantum field. But they can't explain why particles suddenly appear from the quantum field. But particles are said to be disturbances in the quantum field or appearances from the quantum field. And Bohm quite clearly says, well, quantum physicists, they will use mathematical techniques to generate, particles appearing from the quantum field, but they can't tell you why they appear. And they don't want to address this issue. And Mike, my physicist friend, he goes on, he spits blood about this. He says, look, he's my age, about 70. He says, I've been working with these people for years, for 40, 50 years. And I said, well, yeah, okay, you've used these equations. Now tell me why they work. And they used to get upset with him. I said, well, look, there must be a reason why this particle appears here from the quantum field. And what Bohm says, well, what happens at one moment in time conditions the next appearance from the quantum field. But this is not accepted, and this is not accepted by everybody, of course, because Bohm says both consciousness and the appearance of matter are contained as potentialities in the implicate order, which is the quantum field.
So you could say that the implicate order, the quantum field. Let me backtrack. We in normal experience, without the weirdness, we interpret objects out there that interact with our five senses and create, our experience. But what this is implying is that out of the field of experience arises simultaneously an observer and an observed. And this, when I say observer, I don't just mean with the eye. I mean with all five senses.
Yes.
So when you're tasting something, it's not that the object itself is even causing the taste. It's that the experience of you tasting the thing comes first, and it simultaneously arises as an experience of a taste, and then a moment later it's gone, and this, like a movie, this continuum gives the Buddha described it as a fire wheel.
Precisely, and I think that is one of. I think I may even use that. I think he uses that analogy, the movie. I'll find it some point. Yeah, I mean it's extraordinary because this is exactly Yogacara. And for people who are not, Yogacara Yogacara means basically yoga practitioner or the yogic vehicle. But one very important aspect of Yogacara was consciousness only, Vijnanavada, which means that the world is really just an appearance from a deep layer of consciousness. And Yogacara quite clearly says that one moment of experience of a subject-object moment leaves a trace, and the very next moment, another subject-object flash appears, and all sentient beings, this is happening to all sentient beings, and as it were, um, they're all in this hollow movement of experience, and all the experiences are left as traces, which then flash up again, moments of subject object, which gives you the feeling or the very strong idea there is a subject object dichotomy when there really isn't.
Well, the subject object duality arises for some explanations like 1/3800th of a second. And the wanting that to continue and the holding on to that is the whole source of it. What was I going to say though? Well, I was going to say that also you could tie in that the Yogacharya implied with it is this like compassion, and so there's also like it's not just philosophical. It has the implications of this is actually explained. In other words, okay, so what's the so like, you know, Western physics is never what we would call soteriological, meaning it's not meant to liberate you, whereas Buddhism is.
Yes.
So Buddhism never teaches anything just for the sake of the information.
No,
it's always
true.
Right. So how does this save you? The Yogacharya view, you know, it's like, in other words, like how does adopting the Yogacharya, I'll ask you this, how does adopting a Yogacharya view, in other words, seeing it, not clinging on to not just the objects that are appearing, but even the self itself, and also, I guess I like to think of it as it gives you personal responsibility. In other words, if you don't like what's happening on the outside of you, you kind of have to change what's on the inside. And I think this gets to the root of Mahayana, which is bodhicitta, which is sometimes translated as the enlightened intention. And I think that's really what this all comes down to, is intention. That's what affects. Like, in other words, you can't affect when the implicate order unfolds. You can't change it. The maturational consciousness to become, you can't stop it, but you can affect how you interpret it, and that's where intention comes in, and that's what plants the next. So most people are trying to change the movie screen.
Yeah.
But they're not changing the film. We all have the opportunity to change the film, but we're changing it one moment too late, or maybe, like you could say, many moments too late. After we're in other words, it's split into subject and object, and we're identifying as the subject trying to change this object, when in reality they both arose from the same place. And it's a shift. And that's why you and I can appreciate the wisdom is so important, because how if you see reality unfolding or you know, time unfolding from this truly existent subject and object, you're going to interact a completely different way than is, because in other words, I try to live this stuff. I try to live the Yogacharya view. Even as crazy as it is, it's incredibly empowering if you take it to its logical implication and try it out. And when you do, I find it works. I find it really does. It's not magic. I think this would be a good next topic. It's not this magical, instantaneous, I can manifest whatever I want, but it does go to show that you know, that you do have some say in what happens next, but you have to plant the seeds to make that happen. And the seeds don't just come from, oh, and one other thing I just wanted to clarify. I think the Yogacharyas come into trouble, and this is where the New Age also bites on this. This is where they're, even though there's some truth to that, is that when they say that I create my reality from my mind, they're talking about the self after it's split, instead of the implicate order, which is the deeper level of mind, you can say. And if you get in touch with that, it's whether you even have will or don't have will is almost irrelevant at that point, because it just becomes bodhicitta. If you look at Dzogchen, now we're getting, you just join your well, whatever is best for you.
Actually, I thought that they're right to a certain extent. But I mean, when you are an embodied apparent subject, I mean, this is each sentient. Let's talk about each human being, because the free will, the possibility of free will for animals are very limited. And human beings obviously have the greater possibilities of free will.
But you even see in animals a moment where, like a more evolved animal is making a decision, and that.
Yeah, I think that's right.
They have less ability to influence their karma, but yeah. But anyway, we can talk about that. That's another great conversation.
But it is a case that even at the subject level, you do affect your future. You do plant it. This is the whole point of Yogacara, that my decisions at every moment in time affect my future, but it's not going to affect. It doesn't affect my me deciding I want a car is not going to provide a car next day. It's not that kind of. This is it's not that the New Age are completely false. Right. They've just taken the fluffy teddy bear picnic aspect of this to such absurd extremes that it becomes laughable. If I develop compassion and awareness, then over time, this will have vast effects on my life. But if I happen in one incarnation to be suffering the karma of being a multiple serial killer, 2 incarnations back, it may, whatever I do to be nice to people may not have vastly wonderful effects in this life, because you know what I'm saying.
Well, we should definitely
karmas from the past happening as well. So I mean, if I'm the incarnation of somebody who in an Indian village, sort of 20 incarnations back, decided to go about building carts for all my neighbors, and I donated, 50 carts out of bodhicitta to all my neighbors, it might be the case that in this life I think, I want a car tomorrow, and someone turns up with one because of my. You see what I'm saying?
Well, yes, but the reincarnation, that's a big leap for a lot of people. But I'm with you on that. But I think you could explain it. Maybe this is a great topic. We could compare how the seeds are planted in the Alaya consciousness or the quantum field and how they unfold. Because, I like to think of it as, based on your reaction to something, right? Depending,
yes.
Well, just depending on the emotional, like the power of the emotion plants a seed. Now, and I think of the seeds as like kind of like the sun, right? All of the photons in the sun are waiting to come out, but they have to wait in line, so to speak. Or it's like almost like people are on a line to get on a ride. That's all your seeds. If you create a really strong emotional karma, it's almost like creates a big seed, and that seed's going to push to the front faster. But the point is, there's two ways to. There's many. The Madhyamikas would say there's no place to put the seeds, but they still kind of have the seeds, but they don't think. That's what I'm saying. This is a great conversation to debate, to really talk about the Alaya. But I think what I'm just trying to say though is, even if you want to talk about creating, not Buddhism even, just like I'm going to be generous, so I'm going to be wealthy. I'm going to be given. The idea is it's not just thinking and seeing the reality. You have to actually go out and plant the seed. So if, like, Michael Roach wrote the book Diamond Cutter based on this idea that if you want wealth, like the way the quantum field, you can say, interacts, it's a feedback loop. So when you actually give, it does give, you do receive it, and that's implied. But it's not done through just wishing that you had money, or you actually have to actually put the intention. Again, it comes back to intention.
Yeah, it's not as simple as a lot of people would like you to believe it was. Yeah, but going back to Bohm, the extraordinary thing is just how closely Yogacara conforms to Bohm's view of the Holo movement. Now, in fact, Bohm actually wrote an essay. I talk about. I've got a chapter, Bohmian Emptiness.
You want to read it? You want to read a part of it?
It's too long, no, and another time. But he goes into some of his observations in this paper or article he wrote on emptiness. He calls it emptiness. Are extraordinary in the way it conforms to Madhyamaka, the middle way philosophy of Nagarjuna. So, I mean, we could do a whole section on, say, how does Bohm conform to Madhyamaka Prasangika, and how does Bohm connect to Yogacara, and do it in detail rather than me doing it now, because we're quite a way through. But yeah, I mean, Bohm's work corresponds in some aspects to the Madhyamaka view of emptiness, and in more fully in his presentation of the Holo movement, and the fact that moments of experience condition further moments of experience. It completely accords with Yogacara. And what I found was that, in fact, if you take Bohm's work and you take Dzogchen, Yogacara, and Shentong's work, mostly Dzogchen, Yogacara, and you take sequences from Bohm's books and put them together with Dzogchen in particular and some Yogacara, the way in which they fit together is extraordinary. It's not, oh, this is slightly similar. They are saying the same thing. One from a metaphysics derived from physics, and one from metaphysics derived from philosophical analysis and meditative experience.
You could look at it as, Western science is always looking at the objective, looking from the matter objective place, and then the Buddhist, approach, or the Eastern approach is always a subjective journey first. So
that's true, but Bohm also did meet Krishnamurti, and he was very interested in ideas. In the Holo movement, in his Holo movement phase, he was thinking in terms of more in the direction of physics providing a basis for a spiritual worldview. As I said to you in our first discussion, Bohm was a really nice bloke. He was a lovely bloke. I loved reading about his childhood, because he used to lie in bed, sort of reading books about the planets and stuff. When I used to do that, and because he lived slightly before, his childhood was slightly before, but it was a very short period. It was his was in America, I think. It was in America. But it had a very similar timbre to it. And anyway, but
I think it all comes down to, I think we could almost like wrap up on this point, is that everything is searching for like mind or matter, which came first, right? This is like the $1 million, like whatever the chick.
But Bohm also had this. He also had this desire to save humanity.
Okay.
He also. I mean, it becomes very clear. He wanted to do something to help mankind.
Well,
which is why he was a Marxist, because he didn't realize that we said this.
Right.
He thought Marx would be a solution until he realized what was really happening. Right. But then, and then he wanted his ideas developed from physics into metaphysics to provide a background to some kind of spiritual insight.
Well, the word spiritual to me has no meaning. Let's just say mental. I think what we're getting at.
Yeah, but these are the kind of ideas.
But let me explain my point. I think I can give a definition of spiritual, which most people are not thinking, because spiritual just means anything anybody wants it to mean. But you have the quest for consciousness and matter. And there's always this question, what came first, right? So Hindus believe mind came first, whereas our entire Western culture is based on the idea that matter came first. First came matter, then came the earth, inert, unconscious matter gave rise to eventually consciousness, right? Self-awareness. I think all of physics has led to the same place that the mentalists, you could say, the idealists, it's led to the same place. And I think which is the implicate order, which is a place before mind and matter become two separate things. And as long as you're looking for two separate things, mind and matter, self and other, as long as you're looking for it, you're already out of the experience of right, and that's what I would call spirit. Spirit is experience before it has become solidified or perceived as subject and as mind and matter, subject and object.
Yeah, well, I would agree with that. I think
so. The word spiritual, like when you say that, people are going to think we're talking about spirits, or they think we're going to talk about astrology. They don't know what we're talking about.
Oh, I've never thought of that word meaning that.
Well, I just like the word. I like to differentiate mind and matter.
Now, what I mean is, spiritual to me doesn't mean anything to do with what you've just talked about.
Of course not.
Are you telling me that's not the original meaning of the term spiritual?
Well, what would you say is the original meaning?
The one you said, not the one to do with spirits hovering around in astrology and kind of stuff. It was to do with basically the spirit that moves the material way. The noumena, what did the Greeks call it? The psyche.
Or like the cheetah.
Yeah.
That's mind. I think of that as mind. Mind being feeling, like psyche to me is feeling and thinking together, which is the aggregates of perception and of discrimination but yeah, now we're getting into the weeds.
Well, you see, I mean, there's Herbert Gunther.
I was going to say he's how I was introduced to Bohm. Yeah.
One of the great translators, interpreters of Dzogchen.
He's beyond even interpreter. He brought together every science. He's truly like
a complete genius.
Yeah.
But look what I've got here. Look what he says about Bohm. Here we go. This is Gunther, who wrote his book, Ecstatic Spontaneity, Saraha's 3 Cycle of Doha. And Saraha is a Dzogchen master. So this is Gunther writing. The fact is, modern physics has become ever more mystical, not least of all because of the exposure of some of its most outstanding representatives to Eastern thought. David Bohm's association with J. Krishnamurti is well known. Erwin Schrödinger was deeply impressed by Indian philosophy. Niels Bohr chose as his emblem the Taoist yin-yang symbol. C.G. Jung's collaboration with Wolfgang Pauli led to the idea of synchronicity, and so on. Does it not seem fitting that these pioneers be called by the name that history has given to many of its great visionaries, mystics? Now, actually, I think it's a bit over the top for Schrödinger and maybe Bohr, but not for Bohm in a certain sense.
Yeah, I didn't know about Schrödinger being influenced by Eastern thought.
He was, but Schrödinger was not. Schrödinger was not. He was in two minds, as far as I remember, as well as having two cats. But and then from his book, Gunther again. Now, he talks about the inner dynamics of being. It is this inner dynamics of being that eventually pushes it, figuratively speaking, over the instability threshold into its actuality. So the virtually operative actuality in being now assumes true actuality that may be called being's eigenstate. This process is called Zinang, I don't know if I pronounced that right, which, borrowing a term coined by David Bohm, I render as hollow movement. So he's talking about the idea that there is this infinite pool of potentiality, which, because of a kind of inner pressure to unfold, creates a movement within being, which then pushes it into manifesting into what Bohm would call the explicate order. So, I mean, he's talking about the way the explicate order functions within, is produced by a movement within being, and he's interpreting Dzogchen.
Right. We should spend another episode on this, because you're saying being. I think we should replace being is the quantum field he's referring to, right? The ground.
Yes.
But yeah, because he uses a whole different term. Like, yeah, we could definitely
this is
talk.
Each of these people are using differing terminology because
Right.
they come from different.
And even Gunther, every one of his books he's using, but you have to approach Gunther as an experience, right? Like you like every book is you become a different person when you try to get into Gunther's mind. It is absolutely fascinating.
I will point out that probably Bohm's first work in his wholeness and implicate order hollow moving phase is this one, which is Wholeness and the Implicate Order.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that one.
Yeah. And here we have a book of Dzogchen, fantastic book called Unbounded Wholeness. And you can take sections from this book of Dzogchen and sections from this book, put them together, and your mind is blown.
I know. No, we need to talk about this. Like, for whatever
reason. Here.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Next time. That's what we're going to talk. We're going to really get to your new book next time. We spent about 3 hours leading up to that. But no, I like, and just let's end on this one, quick answer. Like, what happened to Bohm's work now? Is he rejected by modern physicists? Is he gotten pretty much forgotten, except for his early stuff, which I know is in the main, like his later stuff, the implicate? Is anyone continuing this research or?
Highly. He has a small group of fans of people who rate his work, but he's overall he's looked as a cul-de-sac. except for the, as we've mentioned, the infinite potential movement. Now, I would say very briefly, his idea of the infinite, of the way that the world is interconnected at such a deep level, has been jumped on by New Age enthusiasts who know very little about physics, are hardly capable of putting two metaphysical thoughts together in their minds, to pursue a fluffy, entirely inappropriate New Age agenda by promoting the idea that anybody, you know, can be given a book of poems and within a few weeks will become, you know, imbued with love for all humanity, which is just so bizarrely
all right. So
childish.
your mission is to change that, is to bring out the truth of Bohm, and eventually, yeah, I think that's important. Is
I mean,
to
that was
explain
Bohm, that was Bohm's hope.
right.
That's Bohm would have loved to have seen that.
So we have a lot of work to do, because we got a lot of people misrepresenting him. So all right, well, Graham, thank you so much again. This has been a ton of information.
But I must say, it's not they're misrepresenting his hopes.
Mm-hmm.
They're misrepresenting the possibilities involved in his actual work.
So, okay. Yeah, that's fair. Fair enough. Yes, thank you, Graham. I will just stop the recording. Oh.